So this is India Simmons interviewing Miss Yulise Waters on November 16th, 2018 in Dallas Hall. So Mrs. Waters, why don't you start off by telling us when and where were you born?
So I was born in Dallas in the wonderful city of Oak Cliff. Well, I guess it's really a subset of a city, Oak Cliff. But that's where I was born. Born in Dallas and Oak Cliff, and that's where I've lived all my life.
Will you tell us a little bit about your neighborhood?
Sure. So my neighborhood as it was when I was growing up, or my neighborhood as it is now?
Growing up is fine.
So growing up, it was a family neighborhood. We lived right behind Bishop Dunn High School, so it was always interesting on Friday night. It's like we had our very own Friday night lights because the football fields was right behind our house. So whenever there was a Friday night football, the stadium lights would light up and we'd just have wonderful crowds cheering and all of that in the backyard. So that was a lot of fun, a unique experience. But it was a relatively diverse community. There were, white Americans, Black Americans, not as many Latino Americans. So it was kind of diverse, a middle class community, yeah.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your family?
Sure. So I have two brothers and mom and dad. We all grew up in the same house. My oldest brother is my half brother, so he went to Bishop Dunn as well. I'm the youngest of the three, which is funny because a lot of times people think that I'm not. They think that my middle brother is younger than me, but I think he's got a beard now. He's kind of catching up in age. But we grew up, like I said, in a middle class family. My dad was very much an entrepreneur and started a business. So we had all been working in the family since we were very young. Yeah.
What did a normal day at home look like?
Oh goodness, was there ever a normal day at home? So during the school year, a normal day at home would be dad up at the crack of dawn just because he doesn't require lots of hours of sleep, so he would always get up early. Hallmarks of a successful entrepreneur. And mom would get up, and a very, very committed family in terms of our Christian faith and Christian beliefs, and so she would be up in the morning and have her prayer time, which we knew, and she cooked breakfast, make our lunches. So we would try to eat breakfast at home. Sometimes it was on the road to school. And then off to school, and went to school and came home. Mom would pick us up from school, and then it was snack time and homework time. So snack time and homework time, and then after that it was off to bed. So I didn't have a family where we all went to bed at like 7 o'clock though. I can't ever remember going to bed at 7 o'clock, which my kids don't go to bed at 7 o'clock either. But yeah, so that's a typical kind of school day during the week. Wednesdays we went to Bible study and all that. So yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that it was primarily white Americans and Black Americans in your neighborhood. Mm-hmm. How would you describe race relations growing up?
I think that race relations obviously were a lot more subtle in terms of, racial inferences and challenges and things like that. I think that I probably grew up at a time where many of the folks in the African American community were really trying to realize the work that had come from the civil rights movement. Particularly in my household, we did some kind of Black history education. I think probably basic Black history education. We didn't do a whole lot of in-depth study. I do remember as a kid at my elementary school, it was my, I want to say, 4th grade history teacher who stood before the class and told us that white kids were smarter than Black kids. And I remember making a decision not to let that destroy me, in the sense that I wasn't going to believe what he said. And so I made it my mission to prove a liar out of him. And my then best friend and I successfully did so, because we graduated from our 6th grade class as valedictorian and salutatorian. She was valedictorian, I was salutatorian, but it was like by decimal points. And then I also remember My dad, he was somewhat involved in politics, really in the sense of like supporting folks who were running for political offices. And he had a particular political sign in the front yard, and that same history teacher was the bus driver as well. And I was riding the bus, I think it may have been my either 5th or 6th grade year as well. And he would normally drop me off in front of the house, but he saw the campaign sign in the front yard and dropped me off way down the street, and I had to walk further down the street. So those were some of kind of the formational experiences that I had with race relations as a kid. But in terms of our neighborhood and our community, you know, I had actually my next door neighbors were Italian, and they were older, they were elderly, and I know my parents had a good relationship with them. That was our neighbor on the right. Our neighbor on the left was an older white gentleman, sweet man as well. And so I think our community was really more about, you know, creating a safe space and an environment for families to grow together, than, you know, really just kind of being really rooted into their, you know, racial perspectives and things like that.
So what was high school like for you?
So high school was interesting. I went to a predominantly white high school and made great friends, people that I still, you know, hang out with or talk with today. My education was really good, and I became the senior class president, and so you know, it was a good experience. There was times where I don't know if I really knew it and understood it at the time, but I knew that because of my presence and the presence of other African American students in the environment, we were creating cultural expansion moments for other folks in the school. I remember myself and some other friends, we were kind of, you know, 1 or 2 grades apart, but we were the first folks to push for there being a Black History program because there had not been one. I remember at the time, I did not think about it in context because I just didn't know it, but for the longest time, we did not get MLK holiday off. And so my mother said, "You're not going to school." And so I wouldn't go to school on MLK Day. But being able to look at it in hindsight, I have understood the context in which that happened, because I believe MLK Day was finalized, I believe, somewhere around 85 or so. I know that Mrs. King was working really hard to get a federal holiday for MLK. And me being born in 80, so by the time I was in like high school, it had only been a federal holiday for just a few years. So I assume that other schools just had not yet decided to acknowledge it, but we were acknowledging it. And so my mother would send a note to school, Yulise will not be attending school on MLK Day. But it was a great opportunity to be able to experience cultures, and then also to engage with people that didn't look like me. You know, I can remember times where classmates and other schoolmates was like, "Can I touch your hair?" Yeah, I'm sure that others have had that experience before. And rather than being annoyed, I just saw it as an opportunity to educate and to engage in conversation, hopefully fruitful conversation. So that's kind of what high school was like. I played sports, basketball, track, threw the discus and the shot, and so I had a lot of opportunities to really just kind of grow socially, you know, in my high school experience.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it was a good time.
How did you end up at SMU? So
the story goes that it was like a couple of weeks or so before senior graduation, and because the school I went to was small, we only had 72 graduating students, and we needed to submit where we were going to school. And I had applied to 5 universities, And I thought that maybe if I didn't get into one, that would help me decide. And I got into all 5 of them, so that wasn't helpful. And my mother just called me into what we called the game room at the time. She's like, Yulise, you got to decide. Like, we need to know because we've got to submit it to the school. And then I was just like, SMU. I'm going to SMU. And jokingly, she said, if it was that easy, why didn't you make this decision already? Well, I told her, like, it wasn't that easy beforehand. So the interesting fact is I knew that I wanted to go to SMU Law School before I was determined that I wanted to go to SMU for undergrad. So it just kind of worked out. So that's how I wound up here. Yeah.
Did SMU have a reputation amongst the African American community?
Oh, absolutely. You would always hear, I would always hear, stories, don't get caught in Highland Park at night. Stories about how, slaves and other folks, people of color, built the campus but couldn't attend the university. Stories about, how few students of color attended SMU. But I think because of my experiences in high school and junior high school, being in predominantly white communities, that didn't really persuade me against coming to SMU. And I had some relative engagement with SMU as well, and with the campus. I was pretty good at shot, and I remember my parents had hired me a coach for shot, and so we'd come to SMU to practice. So that was kind of an opportunity for me to get a little familiar with the campus then. My brothers had done like basketball camps here and things like that. So there was always this, connection to SMU. And then I believe my dad had taken some classes here at one point as well. So I had a connection to SMU. But the stories and the negative perception in terms of possible climate or experiences for people of color were definitely out there.
So on the first day of school when you arrived here, how welcoming was the school?
It's interesting. It depends on who you talk to, like who. So for the most part, everyone was welcoming. I remember. Is it still called Arrow? I don't know. Is it? It's still called Arrow. Okay, so I was here for Arrow, and I want to say that I was in the South Quad because you could stay on campus for a few days to sort of get acclimated to the campus. And I remember going up to the window. It was McIlvaney. I was in McIlvaney because it had just been renovated. Now that was years and years ago, so I'm sure it's been renovated again since then. But it was down in McIlvaney, and I was in line to get my room assignment. And I remember getting my room assignment and them telling me what number I was in, and then I kind of moved over to the side with my mom, and there was a girl behind me who was checking in as well. And I remember standing there and hearing them call out what her room number assignment was as well. And I remember her, she was a white girl, blonde hair. And I remember her hearing the room number and looking over at me and then said, "Oh, I'll be staying with my parents." And I thought, oh, wow, well, that's unique. And that could have really deterred me from being on campus. But I think that the way that my mom responded to it was very, very helpful. She just looked at me and she said, "Don't worry about it, honey. We're just gonna go on and go to your room. They just need you to have your room by yourself." Right? And that's a hallmark of how she would kind of take things and flip them and turn a negative into a positive. And after that experience, I mean, I didn't really have, a whole lot of other, negative experiences in terms of my engagement with folks on campus. I do know of others who did have some, disheartening experiences, but yeah, that Arrow experience, it kind of stuck with me. Turned lemons into lemonade, but I came on anyway. So
that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Did you live on campus?
I did. I lived my first year in Shuttles Hall. Then I lived my second year in Peyton Hall. I lived my third year in Smith Hall. I lived my fourth year in Moore Hall, and for a semester. Then I was abroad in Spain for the spring semester. And then when I came back, I don't think I lived on campus. I think I commuted from my parents' house because I did 3 degrees, so I wound up doing it in 4.5 years. So that last fall semester, I think I commuted.
So during those 4 years, did you have any roommates?
I did. First year, I actually wound up not having a roommate, so it was great. I had a double as a single. My roommate was supposed to come and I guess decided she was going to go somewhere else. So I really enjoyed having a double as a single. Made for great study time. And then let's see, Peyton Hall, my roommate was Regina James, and we were good friends. She was also a Dallasite. And let's see, Smith Hall. I did have a roommate there, and then Moore Hall room. Yep. So just the first year, I didn't have a roommate.
How was the experience your last 3 years there with the roommates?
It was great. It was really good. I had one roommate who had sort of an alternate schedule for me. So my first year that I had a roommate, Regina, we were both in the business school. So we had classes together, we could study together. We were really similar in terms of personality and, cleanliness and all of that. So that was really helpful. She was dating a guy at the time and he lived down the hall. So, any given day I could come in and she wasn't there because she was always with him. But we were good friends, and we're still friends today. We hit each other up on Facebook every now and again. But the year that I had a roommate with the alternate schedule, it was different. She was a film major, and she really liked to sleep. And I just told you I was working on these 3 degrees, so like sleeping was not happening a lot for me. So there were times she had a routine of she didn't have early morning classes. When she didn't have early morning classes, she'd come back and put on her pajamas and get in the bed. And I'm just thinking, wow, it must be nice to be able to do that. But she was fine, and we had a good time, and we still communicate to this day too. And then my last year was another friend of ours. We were in the Voices of Inspiration Gospel Choir together, and I was the immediate past president, and she was the president, and so that worked out fine too. Yep. That's
nice. Mm-hmm. Were you involved in any other clubs or sports during your time here?
So I walked on as a athlete. I showed up in Coach Dave Woolman, yeah. I don't know if he's still around, but I threw shot and discus in high school, and I decided, you know what, I'm gonna walk on and see if I can, I had become more increasingly aware of how renowned SMU's track and field program was, really the field program. And so I was like, well, I'm gonna just walk on. So I go in and I go to try to walk on, and I said, I wanna throw shot and discus. And he looked at me and he kind of chuckled, and I was like, he chuckled at me? And he said, well, you're too short to throw the discus and you're too small to throw the shot, so why don't you try the hammer? And I'm like, what? Coming from my TAPS division private school, I'm like, I'm too short? Okay, short maybe, because I'm not that tall, but I'm too small to throw the shot? And then when I showed up for practice, I walked out and I went into the weight room. And when I'm walking down the hall and get into the weight room, I see a woman who is got to be about 6'2", 6'1", 6'2", probably a good solid 300 plus pounds. And she was one of the shot throwers from Russia. And I was like, yeah, I'm probably too small to throw the shot. So I said, well, the hammer it is. And I walked on and started practicing to throw the hammer. And it was a very interesting experience being a student athlete. I gained a tremendous respect for people who, because I was not on scholarship. Later on, I had conversations. I wound up not continuing with that, and Coach Woman was kind of disappointed about that because I had gotten pretty good at throwing the hammer. But being able to experience the rigor and the schedule of a student athlete was informative. I can remember several days because I had tendonitis in my knees and my Achilles tendon, and I can remember several days going to the athletic center and getting wrapped up with ice and walking back to my dorm room all iced up. And then having to go to travel and go to meets and compete and still stay on top of your schoolwork. That actually led me to become the athletic tutor for the LEC at the time. So I don't know if it's still the Learning Enhancement, the Learning Enhancement Center or not. But I did. So I started tutoring some of the student athletes in the LEC. After that, I was like, man, this is just rough. So hats off to student athletes, because it's certainly a feat to be as engaged in your academics as well as the athletics.
Were there any other clubs or organizations?
Yeah, so I did Association of Black Students. I was a part of that. I never ran for office or in leadership. I kind of minimized my involvement because I was doing these 3 degrees. So I did that. I was involved a little bit with Students for Spiritual Renewal. Don't know if they're still around. Victory Campus Ministries was around at that time, so I kind of hung out with them a little bit too. I think that was probably just about it in terms of kind of my hardcore leadership roles, while I was here on campus. But, anytime, we call it Chaz, I don't know if it's still called Chaz or not, but anytime Chaz or anyone else had events going on, we'd be a part. We'd always support each other, so.
That's nice to hear.
Yeah. So
you mentioned you were pretty busy with the 3 degrees.
Right.
So what did your social life look like?
So I was always really very studious. I didn't pledge any sororities. Part of the reason was because I didn't like the fact that they would probably impact my grades. So I didn't pledge any sororities, although I have a lot of friends who are in sororities. Because when I got here, I talked to Laquita Jenkins, she was the advisor for it was at the time the Intercultural Student Affairs Office, or Office of Intercultural Student Affairs, or something like that. And I asked her, I said, hey, Laquita, I need some more money. I got a little bit of a scholarship, but I need some more money, so show me the money. And she's like, well, you know what, there is an upper class presidential scholarship that, that you could possibly be eligible for, but you got to have a 3.75 and above GPA to get invited to apply for. So you got to get invited to apply? Oh, well, okay. Well, it looks like I need a 3.75. Sure enough, first year I got a 3.75, so I received the invitation to apply, which I did, and I got one of the 4 upper class presidential scholarships. That's why I was abroad in Spain for that spring semester. And so social life was, we'd probably go to a party if it's on campus. If it's not on campus, then it's questionable whether or not we're going to go. But I always had to get a substantial part of my work done before I went. So Friday night, they're like, are you coming to the party? You coming over to the student center? Yeah, I'll be there about 10:30. So I would do homework on Friday evening and study, and then start getting ready for the party, maybe about 9 o'clock, which, this many years later and 3 kids later, I'm thinking starting to get ready at 9 o'clock? No way. And so socially, I was always I wasn't a socialite, but very friendly, had a lot of friends. Everybody knew that I was focused on grades. They used to talk about me a lot. So socially, I really kind of hung out with the groups and organizations on campus, and didn't really do a whole lot beyond campus. Yeah.
So looking back, what would you say was your most memorable experience? Oh,
wow. probably maybe hands down, the most memorable was at the time I was acting as a student advisor for the Voices of Inspiration Gospel Choir, and we had begun planning. So Voices had always done an annual recruitment trip, and when I came into office as the president, we wanted to revamp it a little bit. We realized that we weren't really recruiting a whole lot of folks on our recruitment trip. And so we decided to do more of a community service trip for engagement and for camaraderie amongst the members of the choir. And one year we decided to go to New York. And I think that's probably one of the furthest trips that had been planned. And we kept trying to work on it and couldn't really get a whole lot of headway. And this was the summer of 2001. And we were able to pull plans together, and things came through, but we couldn't figure out still, like, why do we feel like we just need to go to New York? And turned out that September 11th happened, 2001, and our trip was scheduled October 2001. And so my then boyfriend at the time, but now husband, Michael Waters, we led a group of 40 people on a charter bus where we drove to New York and did sort of street ministry. We did like a soup kitchen. We literally were driving on the bus, and the bus driver says, "Oh my goodness, there it is." And we were like, "There it is." And we looked, and it was ground zero in front of us. And this, mind you, is just a month after September 11th happened. So we were all just really taken back by what we were seeing. And obviously the city was still reeling from the devastation. But one of the spots where we did kind of street ministry and, the choir sang, we were on a loading dock. And I believe there's pictures out there from it, but we were on a loading dock and we were just singing on the loading dock, and just crowds and crowds of people started to walk up and hear these songs of hope. And, there were several people who came up to us afterwards and just, in tears. And we were able to spread a lot of love and hope to that community in that time. So I think that's probably one of the most memorable experiences from college.
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
What about group projects? Did you ever have any group projects during your undergrad experience?
I did. We had, we had a couple of group projects. I will tell you, I probably don't remember a whole lot about them because I was working so hard. I do remember it was one fall semester. We were in accounting, me and Regina. I told you about my roommate from Peyton Hall. We were in accounting, and we had this major project that was due, and we had to get, it was for the Thanksgiving holiday, by the way. And I remember we were both working on it so hard, and you had to get it in by 5 o'clock, right? And the funny thing, so one of my majors was in Spanish. And so I always had a perspective being on campus that I don't care if you are, our cleaning crew, if you're one of the janitors, if you're one of the, kitchen workers, I'm going to treat you with respect and speak to you like you're not an invisible human being, right? So I'm going to engage you in conversation. And so I would often use that opportunity to practice my Spanish with a number of the folks who were, who were making sure that the campus grounds were together. And we were trying to get this project in, and it was past 5 o'clock. And our professor was like, you got to put it in because I'm going to close the door at 5 o'clock and lock it. And so we get over there, and I was like, Regina, we missed the cutoff. And we looked around, we stood there, we were thinking, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? It's like a major project, right? Major grade, And we saw the cleaning lady that we normally speak to. And so I started speaking to her in Spanish, and she came and opened the door for us so that we could submit our accounting projects. And it was great. I think we both got A's on it. So that was one of it wasn't necessarily a group project, but that was one of those major projects that I really remember.
So you mentioned Spanish was one of your 3 degrees. What were the other 2?
English and business. I specialized in organizational behavior and business policy, which I think they've changed to be called management now. So English, Spanish, and business.
So within those 3 departments, how did race relations manifest themselves, if they did?
You know what? It was really not even so much the department, it was in the classroom. And I think mainly for the business community, I think that there's a nice level of diversity in the business community. And so for the business degree, you know, our race relations seemed pretty decent. In the English department, when we would have class discussions, and when you started engaging in some of those upper level English classes where you're really thinking sort of philosophically about issues, I remember just kind of, you know, having some not heated debates, but some intense conversations about matters of perspective and the lenses that we view the world through. And as for Spanish, you know, everybody was struggling trying to learn a foreign language, and so the race relations there were fine. I do remember distinctly, though, when I was preparing to go to Madrid, you go through, for study abroad, they'll really make sure that you're prepared for the cultural differences and things like that. And I distinctly remember going to Madrid and thinking that some of my trip participants were a little narrow-sighted in their perspective about other communities. I remember being abroad, and you know, we had to travel in groups, you know, starting off at the front end of the experience, and I remember thinking to myself, wow, you guys really sound privileged. The ways in which some of the trip participants will respond to folks in the airport or on the bus, you know, speaking English to them and saying, why don't you know English? And I'm thinking, you are in Spain. They speak Spanish, so learn Spanish. And so there were several times where that was, and that again was after September 11th. So I flew out in January of 2002, and so at the time, President Bush was the president. I can remember going to different. We were in Barcelona, or as they say in Spain, Barcelona. And we were on Las Ramblas, I think, and there was a protest happening. And I remember seeing a Bush sign with a circle and a line through it. And I was thinking, wow, I'm not sure how popular it is to be American right now. So,
anytime.
You know, and probably a little more popular than it is now to be American. But the experiences that I had probably were most distinct when I went to Madrid, and then also in the English department. But my professors were phenomenal. Dennis Foster, to this day, that man had dramatically impacted my writing and the way in which I communicate and express in written form. I had a Professor Hodges, I think, my freshman year, and she was phenomenal as well. I think it was like rhetoric. Is it still rhetoric that they take first year?
Disc.
I'm not sure, maybe.
It's disc.
Okay, disc. Oh, okay, so it's not rhetoric. Oh, well, there you go. So anyway, those my race relations experiences, for the departments.
Did you have any mentors at all?
In undergrad, I don't think so. I sort of adopted professors. I remember I had an English professor who was my advisor, and there was absolutely nothing wrong with her. She was a great advisor. But I mentioned to you Dennis Foster, and I knew that I was doing something in my writing which made my syntax not as as communicative as it could be. It didn't flow as well. The ideas weren't communicated as well, and I could not figure out what was going on with my sentence. And so I had gone in, I think Professor Foster was my professor at the time. I went in to him and I said, hey, I can't figure this out. And he looks at the sentence and then he says, what's your subject? And I just stopped and I read the sentence and then I had to laugh. I said, I don't think I see a subject. He's like, there's your problem. And the moment that he did that, I was like, okay, you're my advisor now. So I just switched. I just told him, like, you're my advisor. And let's see, and Steve Denson, who is still at the business school, and I still stay in contact with him very frequently. Awesome, wonderful professor for negotiations. Michael Van Breda, he's not around still. I think he's retired, but he was phenomenal. So I think rather than having like other folks who were, sort of mentors, I think I just found professors that I gravitated towards whose way of teaching and knowledge base I really appreciated, and I just kind of soaked up what I could from them. Professor Slocum, who was the organizational behavior, business policy chair, I believe. So yeah.
That's nice. How well did you feel that the Black community was represented at SMU?
Represented in what way?
I guess maybe in the students or reflected in the student population or the faculty members.
Oh, there was, well, in terms of reflection, in terms of faculty members, we were lacking. I'm trying to think. I did not have an African American professor here. I know my husband did in the history department, I believe, but I did not have an African American professor. I did choose to, as one of my electives, to take some voice classes, and was really, her license plate is music. I don't know if she's still around, but Barbara, what is Barbara's last name? She's a wonderful, wonderful voice professor in Meadows. And I did not get to have her as one of my instructors for the electives because she taught the higher level folks, but one of her students became one of my voice instructors. So that was one time where I had a person of color, an African American woman, to be a professor. But yeah, so that experience I have not really had. I did not have an African American professor until I went to law school, and there I did for one of the writing classes. But so I think that aspect of diversity on campus definitely then could be improved, and I know it can be improved now as well. It is kind of an ongoing conversation, but I think one of the challenges is the selection pool of, PhDs and things like that. It's a competitive market to get an African American, professor, on campus, I think. In terms of community, we actually had a really close-knit African American community. Our Association of Black Students was, it was together. Whenever a call from ABS went out, people showed up, and it wasn't just, we were all very welcoming of other communities and other people, but also recognized the very real need for a space where we could discuss our issues, where we could encourage one another, where we could share information with one another, where we could, sort of continue to explore our cultural heritage. And I think it's like multicultural student affairs or something like that now. So I think that space, having those different affinity groups, collective, creates an opportunity to share in our communal experience of being minorities on campus, essentially. But yeah, we had lots of. We used to call the open area in the student center, I think we used to call it the spot. either the pit or the spot, one of the two. But anyway, so we had a good close community. Yeah.
Outside of that, how well did you feel you were treated by other students or faculty members?
There was, I think the biggest challenge in terms of, not the biggest challenge, one of the experiences that was probably most negative is times where there's a particular fraternity on campus that would always do something that was negative towards, the Black community. And surprisingly enough, I think they would always wrap Christmas lights around Santa and hang it in front of their fraternity house as well. So I think some of the times where I felt the most engagement or kind of racial engagement probably happened among the sororities and fraternities, because as you got the Black fraternities, you got the national, the Panhellenic Council folks, and then you got your mainstream, historically white fraternities and sororities, and there would be times where some of the folks in those fraternities would do some really unfortunate things, and we would try to, at times when there was an issue that we needed to kind of be responsive to, then, the Black community would respond, and ABS was really kind of a focal point for us being able to take that kind of response. I remember, and what I can't remember is that I think I was law school at the time, but there was a law school group that decided to have a bake sale. It was the Young Republicans of Texas. Had a bake sale, and they were doing these bake sales across the country, and we collectively as a Black community, both law school Black students and undergraduate Black students, held a press conference in response to the bake sale. The bake sale was about articulating the disparities that happened in terms of affirmative action. And so whites had to pay $1 for the cookie, and Asians had to pay 75 cents, and Latinos had to pay 50 cents, and then African Americans had to pay 25 cents for a cookie, right? And so they wanted to talk about the inequity of affirmative action. So that was a, when you think of it in that regard, right? So college is supposed to be a space where you can express yourself and learn and engage in discourse and stretch your mind and your beliefs and your understanding. And so I think that's why we took the approach to do a press conference in response to the bake sale. But I think of all of the experience, that was probably the most blatant. And then the times where like I say, the fraternity would, they would do crazy things like putting out flyers with the N-word on it and some other stuff. Yeah.
How did you feel about graduation?
Oh, by the time I was ready to, I was so done and ready to get my undergraduate experience over. Because I needed so many hours to graduate, I had done summer school both summers before the September 11th fall, and then when I came back from Madrid, I went to summer school again, and then my last semester I needed 21 hours to graduate. So, but I was determined to graduate in 2002. So. I was ready to graduate, and I was commuting back and forth from home too. So I was really, my sort of campus life, campus experience had really come to an end at that point. Mm-hmm.
I see.
Yeah.
So after you graduated, you went straight into SMU Law School?
So I took a semester off. I took the spring semester off, and I declared to everyone that I was doing nothing but staring at the wall for the next 3 or 4 months, because I had been in school for 22 years. So I needed a break. And so I took the semester off and didn't do anything over the spring. I just, I may have done a little bit here and there, but, I think at one point my parents decided to get a little nervous that I wasn't going to do something else. And I said, no, I will. I'm just not right now. And so that summer I interned with Project Transformation, which brought me back to SMU's campus because they house the interns here in some of the fraternity and sorority houses. And they provide summer camp opportunities for kiddos. And when I wound up getting hired on, I wound up being a team lead. And so I did that for the summer and got a little AmeriCorps stipend for it, which was great because I needed that for some books for law school. And I started law school in the fall of 2003.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
How was that experience?
It was unique. It was a unique experience because if you think that the Black community population is small in undergrad, it was even smaller at the law school. I believe by count them, there were 7 Black folks in our class, 5 Black women and 2 Black males in my entering 1L class at the law school. And I think our whole class was somewhere around maybe like 100 or 150 people. And, you know, it was a lot, most of the folks in law school, you know, are, you know, top of the class kind of people, really academically focused, motivated, all that sort of thing. And it was, you know, I think once I got involved with the Black Law Students Association, there was a greater sense of self and kind of sort of support, if you will. I will note this, that my experience in studying abroad in Madrid significantly shaped me in terms of my cultural understanding of myself, right? The thing that I recognized in being in Spain is that, you know, there are people who are born in Spain and they can identify themselves as Spaniards, and they can, you know, trace their lineage back to, you know, whenever, you know. Being in Madrid and learning the culture, Spanish culture, amplified the fact that I am the heir, I am a part of a legacy of people, a diaspora who was brought here from Africa. And I struggled to identify what is my culture, like legitimately what is my culture. And I think I came to the conclusion that, you know, as much as, you know, the tortilla española is, you know, to Spain, collard greens is to Black Americans, right? Sweet potatoes is to Black Americans. And so I began to really look at the things that define Black culture, and to own it as Black culture, and to say we're American, absolutely, but we also have our own culture, and that's something to be celebrated and not diminished. Because so often in spaces where white people are the majority, the cultural beauty of other communities is diminished often. If it's not diminished, it's also critiqued or even made fun of. And I came back very self-aware from Madrid and very confident in the fact that I was proud of what my culture was and that I was interested in delving more into it. And not even just into it, but into the various social events that took place and historical events that took place to shape our culture, right? And so, so a part of the Black Law Students Association, I was the vice president, and my good friend Yodi Halamariam, who also went to undergrad here at SMU, was the president. And we determined that we were going to have the first ever Black History Museum in, so no, that was called the Pit. The Pit is where is at the law school. We determined that we were going to have the first ever Black History Museum. So we turned the Pit into a Black History Museum. So all of us, you know, part of the Black Law Students Associations, we spent hours and hours pulling together exhibits, like researching people. I remember the Sunday night before it was supposed to open was the night that Jamie Foxx got an Oscar. And so we had to hurry up and change our arts because we had to show that he had gotten an Oscar. And we wound up winning, we wound up winning a national award from the National Black Law Students Association for putting on that exhibit.
That's impressive.
Yeah, it was, I think back and I'm like, wow, we were all like 1L law students needing to be reading case law and everything else. But we thought that it was important, and it was important. And a lot of students and faculty had an opportunity to walk through the museum and really, we went from slavery up to present day at the time. So Jim Crow, all of that. Mm-hmm.
How was the transition from school into professional life?
It was unique. I'll tell you one thing. I missed summer vacation. I did. I missed summer vacation, and for the longest time, I would think in terms of semesters. So as a professional, and it worked out okay though, because when I finished law school, during law school, I had interned for a woman by the name of Gay G. Cox, who was a force to be reckoned with in the family law arena here in Dallas, Texas. And she's also an SMU Law alum. I had been connected with her through Jessica, at the time, Dixon. She's now Weaver, Jessica Weaver. I told Jessica that I wanted to do family law, and she said, well, you've got to meet Gay Cox. So I was like, well, okay, let me meet Gay Cox. So I met her and we had lunch, and the following year I reached out to her and said, hey, I can pick my classes this time, because when you're in law school, your classes are set for you for the first year. So I said, hey, I can pick my classes. What classes should I take if I want to do family law? So she emailed me back, told me the classes. She's like, oh, you know what, do you have a clerkship? Do you want to clerk for me? And I was like, yeah. So she was a solo practitioner, so I wound up clerking for her and for a personal injury attorney. And she had told me at the time, she's like, this is just a clerkship. I'm a solo practitioner, so there's no hope of future employment. So just, want you to be able to learn what you can. And she was very big in collaborative law and collaborative law practice. And I will tell you, my engagement with Gay Cox and what she was able to sow into me has impacted the work that I do now. So I finished law school, and she's like, well, hey, let's go have lunch. And I was like, okay, well, let's go have lunch. And we did. And she said, what are you going to do after you graduate? And I was like, well, get a job. Because you told me there's no hope for future employment. So I'm going to get a job. She's like, well, hey, why don't we start a law firm? Okay. Wow. So we got together and talked about it. And so we established Cox Waters PLLC. And so I took the bar in February of 2009. And found out I passed the bar in April of 2009, and we opened our doors as Cox Waters PLLC on May the 11th after I had been sworn in at the state bar. Wow. So that was my transition from school to to professional life. But it was great. It was a perfect fit for me because she was kind of at the tail end of her career, and I was at the beginning of mine, and so she did the collaborative law practice, and I learned from her in doing that. I did the litigation practice, and got my feet wet in litigation, and made a lot of networking contacts with her, and she decided to retire in 2011, and at the time we had 2 small children, and my husband had also been appointed by the bishop to start a church, so we started a church in 2008, right before I started studying for the bar. So it was just, I thought, you know what? I have an infant child or infant children, an infant church, and an infant law practice. This is a lot. So when Gay decided to retire, we decided to close the practice because it would have been a lot for me to run the law practice solo. Yeah. So then that's how I wound up at the city of Dallas.
So since then, what does life look like for you?
A fast roller coaster. Yeah, a fast roller coaster. It has been really a lot of life changes and transitions, and it's been a lot of learning and growing. It has stretched me beyond belief. I tell you, one of the greatest experiences that I have had and that has stretched me is being a mom and being a professional mom at that. Learning work-life balance and establishing boundaries, which has been huge. So we've done, my husband and I have done a lot over the last, we've been out of undergrad for since 2002. So how long is that? This is 16 years. 16 years. They have been an undergrad for 16 years. And so we've had 3 kids. We've been to 4 different church appointments. We have one of those being starting a church, and we've adopted a church, and we've merged the 2 churches. And I've done a lot of work with the city of Dallas over the last 7 years, impacting people's communities and lives. Lots of work in the field of social justice and social activism. Lots of work in terms of mentoring and pouring into, folks coming behind us. So the last several years has been a lot of just establishing us, I think, as professionals, and establishing our expertise, and really sort of putting our mark on things.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Will you tell us a little more about your work with social justice and activism?
Sure. So my husband's work has been more engaged in terms of speaking out about injustices and things like that. My biggest, I think, contribution, other than supporting him and being present when it's time to, amplify issues, my more direct work has been in the realm of criminal justice and criminal justice reform. I stumbled upon criminal justice and criminal justice reform because, remember, I wanted to practice family law. And I adamantly told people often that I would never practice criminal law. And I have found myself in the throes of criminal law. When I went on with the city of Dallas, I became a community prosecutor for the Southwest Division of the city of Dallas, and was housed in the police department, which I will tell you, when I first found out that I was going to be officing out of a police department, I was a little bit ambivalent about it. Because I had personal encounters with the police. My brothers had, my husband has, and so my perspective on police was a bit jaded, but not unjustifiably so. But I value the time that I had in that space, because it gave me insight and perspective into the life and experience of police officers that I don't think a lot of folks have. And it lent me the opportunity to have a voice that speaks to both issues. So I can speak to the issues of people of color who encountered the police in many unjustified circumstances, but then I can also speak to the level of trauma and mental health issues that police officers engage on a day-to-day basis, and are not really set up to in a helpful and healthy way process those encounters. And so I worked in as a community prosecutor, so we did civil litigation, trying to increase safety, decrease crime, and improve quality of life. And in addition to that, I worked in the community courts, and that's kind of where the criminal law aspect comes in as well. And I helped co-found a second chance court called the Second Chance Community Improvement Program. And it's a partnership between the city and the county when it started out back in 2014. And my 2 colleagues of mine and I, we came up with these programs, right? So our respective deputy chiefs of our divisions, the police divisions, came to us saying, what do we do about this revolving door crime? Like, we arrest these folks on these low-level crimes, they go down to the county, and they just wind up getting out or getting on probation. They're back on the streets, and they're driving up our crime stats. So can y'all come up with a program to fix that? Because that's what we do, right? Community prosecution is about being problem solvers. So we get together and we started coming up with this program, and it turns out that the program was, we shopped it to our boss at the time, and she's like, yeah, there's a program like this in High Point, North Carolina. I'm like, what? We just spent the last 3 days trying to, pull it together. And so, so that overarching program became the parent to the court, essentially. And so my job was to kind of flesh out the court and really impact the behaviors of the people who wound up being arrested in these different operations that we did. And that court has been around for 4 years now. And we started off with zero funding, like no dollars. We shopped it to a felony court judge and a misdemeanor judge, and they jumped on board. The public defender's office jumped on board, the DA's office jumped on board, and so we operated for about a year with no money. I wound up writing a grant, and it was a $200,000 grant from the Center for Court Innovation, and we won the grant. And so we had 2 years of funding, and that funding has kind of come to an end now, but we've got another grant that we have been awarded that's a 4-year grant. So hopefully, as we continue this work, we are really kind of breaking ground in terms of innovation for young adults who are involved in the criminal justice system. So the whole point about that is about reforming the criminal justice system, recognizing that a lot of the issues that impact people have little to do with any sort of, innate criminogenic behavior or any pathology, and has everything to do with the social determinants of health, where we are not engaging, particularly young adults, in the ways in which they should be engaged. Lots of literature out there now that talks about how probation is a failure for young adults because the probation system was set up for adults and not young adults. A lot of the brain health studies and development studies showing that young adults are more like adolescents than they are adults. And so holding them to an adult standard is actually more harmful than it is finding ways to engage young adults differently. So that's kind of like, sort of my perspective and my personal push in terms of social justice and criminal law justice, if you will. But as a family, my husband and I, we have been, engaged in a number of the issues that have impacted, particularly Black Americans, expressing the idea that Black lives do matter, lives of color matter, and really trying to amplify the issues. I think probably one of my biggest areas of focus as well has to do with police departments and the lack of mental health. I would say the lack of services, but I know that there are those who would push back on that and say that no, the mental health services are available, and then we delve into the conversation some more. So even if the mental health services are available, there's such a stigma about accessing those services that even if the services are available, if they're not being useful, then the availability of them is null. It's pointless, it's ineffective. And so as we discuss, the relationships between communities and policing, I'm a very firm believer that, we can't have those real conversations without looking at the realities of both communities, both the community of police officers and the communities of people of color. So.
That's all wonderful work you've done.
Well, thank you. It's not work that I set out to do, but my path has brought me here, so. Yeah.
Is there anything at all you feel we may have missed that you'd like to further discuss?
I tell you, we kind of had a pretty broad discussion. Let me ask you, is there anything else about me that you would want to know, or anything else that you would want to delve in more?
I guess maybe perhaps, both you and your husband have done a great deal of remarkable work. Where do you draw your support from, primarily?
You know what, I think we've had a different perspective on life probably since our days at SMU. We really believe that, every life is important, every life is special, and that every life has purpose. And so we have been very intentional about the things in which we involve ourselves, because if it is not going to have impact, then we're not really interested in investing time in spaces that aren't going to be impactful, right? I think that we have inspired each other and pushed each other. And we have since our days at SMU. I mean, he used to come over and study in my room, and I'm like, look, this is a study hall, so anybody wants to come here, you can study. That's what you're gonna do. So I think that we have fed off of each other. But, even I think the greater inspiration, or maybe even the greater inertia, the drive, has just been the push for justice. We've both been very justice oriented since young kids. And so I think our community of faith inspires us. I think that our own personal faith and trust in God and belief in God absolutely inspires and centers us and gives us strength, right? Because, you know, when you, I would say open the newspaper, but people don't really do that much anymore. So when you pick up your phone and the Yahoo News headline or the, you know, MSNBC news headline, or just somebody who's found an article in a community is talking about another black person who's been killed. I mean, this week alone, you have a security guard who is doing his job and saved dozens of lives and is murdered by the police, like is killed in Midlothian. You have, you know, another young man who is killed. I think it was in Iowa. It's in Iowa. There was another state, another killing that happened of a person of color that appears again unjustified. We have the Bothrop John case here, you know, that has happened. And so every time you look, there's just more and more hate. There's more and more gun violence. You've got to have a place and a source of inspiration and hope, because otherwise it looks pretty hopeless. And so, so we draw our hope and inspiration, you know, just from our faith, right? He's got to believe in something bigger than me, because if it's just about me, then we're in trouble. So yeah, so that is, and our kids inspire us too, because the idea is that if we don't take the time to do the work now, to prepare a space for them, what will they inherit from us? And my hope is that they inherit a world that is more loving and more accepting of people from diverse backgrounds. My hope is that they understand that even though someone's culture might be different from yours, there's something for you to learn from it. Even though someone's you know, perspective is different from yours, there's something to be learned from it. And I'm really hoping that they experience and develop, you know, tolerance of others in a way that really expresses the love for humanity that we have. Yep.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Mrs. Waters.
Thank you.
This was wonderful.
Thank
it was
you so
incredible
much.
hearing your story and perspective.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.